As all the sudden chaos and geopolitical drama started kicking off late last night, the sheer irony of the whole situation was basically impossible to ignore. Donald Trump had literally just gotten online to post that the rumored collapse of the peace negotiations was nothing but total fake news. Then, almost right on the heels of that, the entire situation violently lurched forward into a much sharper and more intense exchange of fire between Iran and forces aligned with the United States. This initial clash quickly built up into what looked an awful lot like Iran, heavily battering naval assets and actively striking, or at the very least significantly affecting, the Kuwaiti international airports, along with a good chance they were hitting several other targets in the area as well. What makes this entire development truly significant is the fact that it really does not look like just some minor temporary interruption to the peace. Instead, it looks exactly like a fragile ceasefire arrangement that was never all that solid to begin with, and it might already be rapidly coming apart at the seams. At this exact point in time, the real answer to what happens next rests squarely on the shoulders of Donald Trump, simply because he is the one guy sitting there with the massive United States Navy parked right nearby, trying to figure out and decide what the next move should be. Yet despite all of that, the people over in New York, and especially the big players in the finance sector, are acting exactly as if the conflict has effectively and completely ended. The financial analysts we heard from this morning were talking as though the statistical odds of any further military escalation were sitting well below 1%. You can see that exact belief written all over the financial markets today. The stock market is up. The price of oil has eased up just a little bit. Honestly, I do not buy that rosy assessment for even a single second. My own personal judgment on the matter is far less optimistic, and I was not surprised in the slightest by what ended up happening. We went and hit that specific tanker that had some sort of connection to us. I think it was an African flagged vessel, and they naturally answered back. And then we just answered them again. That kind of back and forth tit for tat is absolutely not the behavior of a war that is actually concluded. The much deeper reality hiding underneath all of this is that Trump currently looks exactly like a man who is trapped all alone in a pitch black room, blindly groping around for an exit that he just cannot seem to locate. He wants out of this mess really badly, and that deep frustration is becoming increasingly visible to everyone watching. But the problem is that simply walking away and just declaring the whole matter finished is not really an option available to him, because when you look at it in the final analysis, Benjamin Netanyahu is the one who actually holds the decisive hand. If Netanyahu decides to reject something, Trump inevitably ends up moving right along with him anyway. I really do not see any clear sign that this underlying relationship has fundamentally changed at all. All of those public insults and angry outbursts might be genuine enough in the moment, but they are not especially meaningful in the grand scheme of things. At the end of the day, Israel is going to aggressively pursue exactly what it wants, and everyone else can just be damned. That is essentially how they see the world. Their ultimate vision still remains the creation of a greater Israel, and the clear expectation is that other countries, especially us here in the United States, will fully support this grand project and keep Iran completely occupied while Israel finishes doing exactly what it wants to do in Lebanon, Gaza, and perhaps in a few other places as well. That reality absolutely must be taken very seriously. Trump might be incredibly exasperated by all of this drama, but his actual room to maneuver is extremely limited. Right at this moment, what he wants more than anything else is to calm down the financial markets and preserve the outward appearance of total stability. That is the exact reason why we keep hearing the constant talking points that the peace talks are still alive and the diplomatic discussions are actively ongoing. But where is the actual hard evidence for any of that? Where exactly are these high-level meetings taking place? Where are the actual tangible negotiations happening? From absolutely everything I can tell from the outside looking in, there is no meaningful direct dialogue actually taking place between the parties. Sure, messages might be passing back and forth indirectly through the Pakistanis and through a few other back channels, but let's be honest, that is not the exact same thing as real face-to-face negotiations. And here is the truly critical point that everyone needs to understand. From the Iranian perspective, they currently hold the commanding strategic position. They completely control the strait, full stop. They are absolutely not giving that leverage up, and when you look at the heavy weapons currently available to them, who exactly is realistically going to force them out? This is simply not a military scenario where you can just land 10,000 United States Marines on the beach and magically solve the entire problem. Doing something like that would simply create 10,000 highly visible targets for the enemy. People have surely explained this harsh reality to Trump behind closed doors, and knowing that fact only serves to deeply deepen his overall frustration. So while we are definitely sitting in a stalemate right now, yes, this is by no means an ending to the conflict. My personal gut instinct tells me that at some point, acting out of sheer anger and frustration, he might just decide to take one more massive shot and try to literally bomb Iran into total submission. The evidence pointing in that dangerous direction is actually not hard to find if you look around. One of Iran's absolute central conditions for peace has been a complete and total halt to all military hostilities over in Lebanon. Yet we all woke up this morning to fresh news reports that Beirut had been hit by airstrikes yet again. I honestly never believed for a second that the supposed severe dressing down Trump gave to Netanyahu would actually matter much of anything, even if that private argument happened exactly the way it was reported in the press, and if Trump really did publicly throw his political weight around, only to immediately watch Israel go and do exactly what it did last night, then the whole situation just turns into a massive issue of political face-saving. Israel went ahead and struck Beirut, and then they immediately issued brand new evacuation orders, effectively pushing the civilian population north of the Zaorani River, which is roughly 40 kilometers or about 25 miles away from the northern border. That specific geographic area covers around 14% of the total Lebanese national territory. Honestly, nobody in the mainstream media is talking about this massive displacement nearly enough, but that action is a major provocation entirely in its own right. It is a clear military escalation, not a de-escalation by any stretch of the imagination, and it plays directly right into Iranian strategic calculations, because Tehran appears to be deeply and fundamentally committed to resolving that specific part of the regional equation. Iran, meanwhile, is currently enjoying a sort of massive celebrity status across the entire Muslim world, simply because it is the one and only Muslim state that finally stood up and said a firm no. It has openly and proudly taken up the noble cause of defending both Gaza and southern Lebanon from military assault. Its official geopolitical position is incredibly straightforward and easy to understand. As long as Israel continues aggressively attacking fellow Muslims in those specific places, Iran will unconditionally stand with them and actively retaliate against Israel. That fundamental reality alone is just one more solid reason why I firmly believe this current war is highly likely to violently reignite in the near future. But let's be clear, there is a whole lot more happening behind the scenes here than just the Israeli angle, as critically important as that specific issue certainly is. A lot of people were absolutely astonished by just how incredibly hard the country of Kuwait ended up getting hit. But you have to remember that Kuwait is also just another artificial artifact of the old British imperial order. All across the broader Middle Eastern region, there is an immense deep-seated resentment directed toward these tiny artificial statelets, whose very existence in the eyes of many locals rests largely on the controversial legacy of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Frankly speaking, there are many people living in the region who desperately want that entire colonial arrangement completely swept away right alongside the state of Israel. So the simple fact that Kuwait took such a severe military blow really should not surprise anyone who knows the history. In fact, I genuinely think that all of those wealthy emirates strung out along the western coast of the Persian Gulf are currently living on seriously borrowed time. Eventually, many of those specific nations will completely disappear from the map and will simply not return. That grim outcome too perfectly aligns with much broader Iranian regional ambitions. And I honestly see absolutely no indication whatsoever that Tehran currently intends to back off or retreat from that long-term objective. So yes, the ongoing Israeli issue definitely remains the very first layer of this massive crisis, and Iran will absolutely keep responding to it with force. But the catch is that every single Iranian military response automatically increases the intense political pressure on Washington to join Israel much more directly in a full-blown war against Tehran. That is the exact reason why I simply do not see a clear, viable path out of this mess. I see absolutely zero evidence to suggest that Netanyahu is suddenly going to wake up and announce that the grand Greater Israel project is being put on hold for the next decade. It is quite the exact opposite, actually. So how does anyone realistically avoid sliding right back into a full-scale regional war? I honestly do not see how it is possible. We are being actively and inevitably drawn right toward it. What that ultimate collision produces is still completely unclear to everyone. But when you look at how high-end conventional warfare is operating exactly as it does right now, I really do not see how such a massive conflict could possibly push Iran out of its total control of the Persian Gulf. That specific geographic control is the absolute center of gravity right now. And the rest of the entire world is just sitting back and watching all of this unfold in absolute amazement. They look over at Iran and say to themselves, wow, these people actually stood up to the mighty United States Navy and the United States Air Force without even having a real modern Air Force or a real blue water Navy of their own. Trump can keep repeating his talking points that he completely sank their Navy and that there was not much there to begin with, but that completely misses the entire strategic point. They still have plenty of men in small, incredibly fast boats darting in and out of the waters, completely capable of causing massive havoc. And every single time you get anywhere near them, you are instantly exposed to their cruise missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, swarms of drones, and whatever else they decide to use against you. What most people completely fail to understand is exactly how this entire narrative is being received across the much wider Muslim world. Many people over there are saying, just look at what Iran has actually managed to accomplish against all odds. And as that deep admiration continues to grow, something else entirely new is quietly forming on the opposite side of the Gulf. We are seeing the very beginnings of a massive Sunni-Muslim alignment. Sunni Arab states, along with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and even Pakistan, which is not Arab but is certainly a Sunni Muslim nation, are increasingly converging quietly in opposition against both the United States and Israel. That specific geopolitical shift is exactly why Trump's desperate effort to get regional leaders to officially sign on to the Abraham Accords was met with near total deafening silence. That entire diplomatic initiative is completely finished. It has absolutely no realistic chance of succeeding now. They have not yet fully coalesced into a formal alliance with Iran, but the longer this current conflict continues, the much more likely that outcome becomes. Greater regional unity is the highly probable direction. And then on top of all that, there is Turkey, which is the true undisputed heavyweight in the room, acting like the massive 500 or 600-pound gorilla just sitting quietly in the corner. Turkey is deeply unhappy right now for a whole wide range of complex reasons. Historically speaking, the Turks always saw themselves as the natural, undisputed leaders of the entire Sunni Muslim world. And now they are completely forced to sit and watch Shiite Iran suddenly become the celebrated dominant power right at the absolute center of regional events. There is a whole lot more unfolding behind the scenes here than most people are genuinely willing to acknowledge. The Turkish question matters for another highly critical reason as well. If Trump keeps constantly sending angry, erratic messages to NATO, actively repositioning American forces, and openly displaying his deep displeasure with the alliance, that behavior could rapidly accelerate Turkey's eventual formal departure from the entire alliance. The honest truth is that Turkey has been much more of a paper-only member of NATO than a fully integrated cooperative one for a very long time. Core Turkish interests do not genuinely align with core European interests at all. Europe has never really wanted Turkey inside the European Union, and Europe's massive internal tensions over Muslim populations and over non-Europeans much more broadly are enormous and actively worsening by the day. So yes, I would fully expect Turkey to eventually drift away entirely from the West. That massive geopolitical break may not actually come with some dramatic, highly publicized formal declaration. It could very well just simply dissolve over time. NATO and the EU may not end with a massive explosive bang. They may just slowly fade into total irrelevance and quietly disappear. Frankly, I genuinely think they are already well down that exact road to ruin. Even right now, they constantly struggle to matter in any coherent, unified sense. The Chinese leadership looks over at the European Union and just shakes their heads in disbelief because Europe simply cannot organize itself or produce a single common strategic position. Attempting serious long-term economic cooperation with such a deeply dysfunctional entity just becomes completely absurd. As time steadily passes by, we are absolutely going to see a whole lot more of that glaring dysfunction. Europe has officially entered a difficult phase where it must desperately rediscover exactly what it is, what it truly wants, and what specific global role it actually intends to play going forward. For Turkey, that harsh reality means acting increasingly on its own without waiting for Western permission. There is no real doubt about that at all. Its future, exactly as Ankara currently sees it, lies directly with fellow Muslim societies scattered across the Middle East, North Africa, and to some meaningful extent, Central Asia. Yet the Central Asian situation is much more complicated because most of those specific former Soviet republics remain relatively comfortable and aligned with Russia. That reality severely limits the Turkish room to establish total dominance there, even if they deeply desire to do so. For us here in America, the most pressing issue is becoming increasingly economic and financial in nature. How much longer can we realistically sit parked in the Sea of Oman, doing effectively nothing at all, while literally burning through taxpayer money at an absolutely astonishing rate? And how much longer is it before access to the vital Red Sea becomes completely blocked as well? Is that dangerous scenario not practically on the enemy's agenda already? I do not have a firm, definitive answer to that, but the financial burden is incredibly heavy. Maintaining all of those massive military forces deployed overseas is enormously expensive. Perhaps as long as the Federal Central Bank can just keep printing new money, people falsely assume it simply does not matter. But exactly how much longer can that fragile financial illusion hold up? Just look at London right now. Their government gilt yields are hovering right around 5%, and Britain looks dangerously close to a total financial and economic breakdown. They are perhaps 4 to 6 months ahead of us on this exact same destructive road, and we are currently trying to quietly prop them up in the background. But exactly how far can that financial support go? How much economic support can we realistically provide to them? Not much at all, in my honest view, primarily because we are traveling down the exact same path to ruin. And this brings us to the truly critical point. How exactly do you stop interest rates from continuously climbing in this highly volatile environment? Inflation is steadily rising, and some top economists are actively projecting it could hit 6% by the end of the summer. In the short run, the obvious political message coming from Trump and his inner circle is crystal clear. The war is ending. Things are rapidly improving. We are actively talking to the Iranians. Everyone just calm down. But do not believe a word of it. That specific narrative is purely designed to steady the financial markets and keep public panic tightly contained. Over the long term, I honestly do not think that optimistic story will hold up. In the short term, however, Wall Street clearly believes the political performance. That probably just reflects the simple fact that so many people working around Trump come straight out of the Wall Street financial sector. But that definitely does not make the underlying story actually true. The exact same blind overconfidence shows up in current market valuations. There are already serious historical comparisons being made to the great crash of 1929, with current stock valuations sitting even higher than the infamous dot-com bubble. And much of that massive inflation appears directly tied to AI mania, massive overinvestment, circular investment schemes, and wild speculation just feeding on itself. Add to that mix the alarming reports about diesel fuel deliveries into the United States being artificially inflated to absolutely absurd levels, and the big question becomes whether domestic fuel prices can really be brought down significantly before the upcoming midterm elections. My direct answer to that is that it heavily depends on several complex variables, beginning with the basic fact that the true economic effects of this war with Iran are really only just starting to register in the data. How severe those economic impacts become depends heavily on whether the war actively expands or finally halts. Right now, there does not seem to be a genuine workable plan to stop the fighting, and we have this so-called naval blockade, which I am not even entirely sure I fully understand. I do not know precisely what this blockade is actually achieving on the ground. Russian, Indian, and Japanese tankers have still successfully exited the Gulf, which clearly tells us that oil is still moving outward. The Iranians are actively selling it. We know that much for a fact. They can also physically move oil across Iranian land toward the Caspian Sea, so not absolutely everything has to flow directly through the Persian Gulf. Even so, a great deal of the global energy market depends on whether the Gulf is truly open for free navigation. Iran has publicly said it can be open, but only under strict Iranian authority working directly alongside Oman. In other words, they fully intend to control the entire Gulf. We are absolutely not going to accept that reality, and from our national standpoint, it is completely fatal to any durable, long-term agreement. So when people inevitably ask what the real economic effects will be, my honest answer is that we have barely even begun to feel them yet. Broadly speaking, I genuinely think we are going to have one hell of a difficult time trying to keep consumer prices down. They are much more likely to just keep rising. There is also this massive, highly confusing issue of so-called shadow oil. These are the completely unaccounted for barrels of crude just floating invisibly through the global system. Exactly how many of those barrels are there? Where exactly are they hiding right now? Are they still actively moving across the oceans? I honestly do not know the exact numbers, but apparently they do have a measurable impact on the market. I cannot tell you precisely how many millions of barrels that specific shadow market involves. Still, when you zoom out and look at the larger macroeconomic picture, I would confidently say we are in very serious trouble. We are in dire straits, if you will. Shifting gears from there, another major global front absolutely demands our immediate attention, and that is the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Here in the United States, that brutal war has fallen badly out of the daily news cycle, yet out on the actual ground, the fighting appears to be rapidly intensifying. Around key places like Konstantinivka and even further down in Zaporizhia, there are clear signs of massive military formations that strongly suggest something much more significant may be actively developing. Tactically speaking, yes, those specific battlefield changes are definitely occurring. What is much harder to accurately determine from the outside is the larger strategic purpose and the specific operational focus driving those movements. But on the purely tactical level, the Russian military has successfully solved most of the major logistical problems that previously constrained them. They are now overwhelmingly in total control of the battle space. They are completely dominating it. So the real question is no longer whether they possess the ability to act, but rather what exactly they want to do next. If you were actually sitting inside the Kremlin and looking closely at the military map, you would clearly see a huge concentrated mass of Russian military power gathered in southeastern Ukraine. You would also see another very large troop concentration located farther north and west, effectively sitting astride the main avenue of approach straight to the capital city of Kyiv. Then there is a massive third concentration of forces located in Belarus, sitting just north of Kyiv, and I am reliably told that specific grouping includes somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 North Korean troops as well. With those massive force concentrations fully in place, Russia could, if it so chose, act simultaneously or near simultaneously on multiple fronts, or they could decide to do it sequentially. They could easily cross the wide river near Zaporizhia, use the critical bridge there, move rapidly on the port city of Odessa, push south and successfully seize it. That is honestly the most logical way to execute that operation. You would absolutely not waste valuable time trying to storm Odessa directly from the Black Sea with an amphibious landing. That specific approach creates way too many massive risks in this environment, including terrible accidents and unnecessary tactical complications. The other major, looming question is the capital city of Kyiv itself. When you completely strip away the superficial political appearances, what are you really dealing with over there? Someone actually said just yesterday that the Ukrainian state is completely dead and simply has not been formally informed of that sad fact yet. That is an incredibly harsh line to take, but it is really not an inaccurate one at all. The Ukrainian state as a functioning sovereign entity is barely functioning at all. I honestly would not even describe it as merely being on life support. What is actually being kept artificially alive is an enormous, deeply entrenched, organized criminal network spread across the entire country, actively siphoning off roughly half of all the financial aid that comes in and illegally reselling perhaps half of all the military equipment it receives. Exactly how do you terminate that corrupt system? In the end, the only real way is to physically cross the river and directly enter the city. I genuinely think that specific military possibility is being very seriously considered by the High Command. The massive forces definitely exist for such complex operations, not only in the massive troop buildups around Kyiv, but down in the south as well, including for a major move on Odessa. Right from the very outset of this conflict, Vladimir Putin strongly hinted that both Kharkov and Odessa, which are historically Russian and heavily Russian-speaking cities, would eventually become Russian territory once again. And we absolutely should not forget the horrific events that happened in Odessa back in 2014, when ethnic Russians were violently driven into buildings and literally burned alive by radical Ukrainian nationalists. That is absolutely not a historical crime that Moscow is simply going to politely ignore forever. There will inevitably be a severe reckoning. The real question now is purely about timing. The weather matters enormously in these large-scale military campaigns. If you are genuinely going to do this, the absolute best time to strike is right now. You need to move immediately. Do not wait around. Once you get to late August or early September, the autumn weather shifts dramatically and the critical window for rapid mobility and tactical maneuver narrows down significantly. That is exactly why I strongly suspect Russian military commanders are currently telling Putin they are fully prepared to execute the plan. They have all the necessary heavy equipment. They have the complex logistics, the massive supplies, the artillery ammunition, the forward railheads, and even the additional rail infrastructure has been methodically positioned to perfectly support exactly the kind of massive operations I have just described. The Russian military has been extraordinarily deliberate in their planning. That level of preparation is absolutely not accidental by any means. At the exact same time, Ukraine's long-range drone and missile strikes keep happening, and that reality is deeply frustrating for the Russian side. Those specific attacks would simply not be possible without our direct help, meaning the intelligence and targeting support from the United States, Britain, or France.